I think that's like a key component of emotional intelligence. It's being able to step outside of yourself and understand somebody else's perspective. And from that, you can grow and learn. And like, in an organization, you can have access to so many different ideas because you're allowing yourself to see other people.
The voice you just heard was one of my students from last semester. Did she just say students? I sure did. This past year, I started teaching at Temple University, so I'll always be MG, the venue specialist. I'm really enjoying my role as Professor MG. As a project for my leadership and organizations class, the students paired up to record a short podcast about what they've enjoyed and learned in class so far, incorporating the role of emotional intelligence in their lives. With the students' permission to use their project for this season, I've broken each recording into bite sized clips. This week, I'm joined by my friend Becky Yep. We'll listen to the clips and carry on the conversation started by Alexis, Eve, and Nasira. If you're looking to gain insight into diversity dimensions in both positive and toxic workplace culture, you're in the right place. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the following episode, DEI and Intersectionality 305. Don't be late to class. Class is back in session. I am Professor MG, and I am joined today with my friend and neighbor, Becky Yep. How are you doing today, Becky?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that this worked out. I was supposed to have you come and guest speak at my for my leadership and organizations class, and so you would have gotten to meet these students in person, but unfortunately got sick that week. So we're making up for lost time here.
Yes, that was when I succumbed to COVID. I was no longer in the survivor pool there. Finally got me.
Finally took you out. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Becky Yep, professionally known as Rebecca. My pronouns are she, her. I work for a technology company in Center City, Philadelphia. I'm a senior technical program manager for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a really big mouthful. Basically, I work to embed DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, into the technical products and services for our customers, for equitable customer experience. So especially in the accessibility space for things like television, gaming remotes, web pages, making sure that all this content and hardware is available for folks that have physical or intellectual disabilities. My background's actually in aerospace engineering, so I'm pretty new to this role. Just started at the end of March, but I'm loving it so far.
That's awesome. And with all the clips that we're talking about today, you can see why it was a perfect fit to match you up with our three students today, Alexis, Eve, and Nasira. So we are going to go ahead and jump into our first clip.
I'm Eve Machada. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Alexis Adams, so she, her.
And I'm Nasira Muhammad, she, her as well.
To start off, we were kind of looking at the 11th week topic of racial and diversity inclusion within the workplace. And we thought it was pretty interesting just how there are a lot of different factors when it comes to diversity. And I think primarily the most important factor is racial diversity and having different perspectives potentially from different cultures or places from around the world. And even places like within the US having like different racial identities, having their own perspective, is really interesting to hear, and an important input when, like doing projects in work, along with the secondary idea of looking at people's gender and seeing that having a different, not only racial identity, but also a gender identity can increase the total diversity and perspectives that people can bring to the table.
I think that's a really profound, point to make and you to have. And I think just being mindful of everyone else's, and being mindful of other people and understanding that other people come from different backgrounds and just accepting people for where they're at and who they are.
Exactly. Like you would never want to immediately assume the worst in someone just because someone might do something that could be off-putting or confusing to you doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong or something that you should look negatively at.
Yeah, I think that's like a key component of emotional intelligence. It's being able to step outside of yourself and understand somebody else's perspective. And
Yeah.
from that, you can grow and learn. And like, in an organization, you can have access to so many different ideas because you're allowing yourself to see other people.
They're just so brilliant. I just loved listening to all of these clips again. So with your new role within, the DEI space, like kind of, and as a human being, like what are your reactions to what these folks had to say?
So first of all, definitely commend Alexis, Eve, and Nisira. I think they're so compassionate and thoughtful. They made great points on empathy and mindfulness, and I think they touched on intersectionality. I think the student called it total diversity, but same type of thing. So really applaud that this is something that's being discussed at the student level, because it's a pretty advanced topic and it's a nebulous space that's continually being defined and evolving. One of the things that the first student touched on was factors. So like, at our company, we call them diversity dimensions. They're also sometimes called protected classes, protected classes. And diversity dimensions encompass a lot of different things, right? So they do include the dominant culture, so maybe like cis white male, but they also include the traditional, what we think of as marginalized communities. They touched on, racial identities, things like that. And so it's great that the students are thinking about this, because it's something that is present in, the everyday world and in the workplace. It continues on in life in the workplace. So it's important to have a holistic understanding of how this might affect, their life from a student or professional perspective. Another cool thing about diversity dimensions, something that I was just learning over time, was that some are immutable or inherent, so they won't change over time. Like racial identity, that's something that they touched on at the very beginning, while others are acquired, like your socioeconomic status or education level, and then some may change over time without action, like everyone's going to age, and over time your physical ability might change, without your control. So it's great to just keep all these factors, as they call them, in mind, because it really informs the whole being. I love that they touched on regional differences, even among racial identities or gender identities, because different demographics are not monolithic. So a person of color living in New York City might have different experiences than a person of color living in Texas, for example.
Exactly.
And yeah, for sure. And then another important thing is to differentiate identity from basically diversity or diversity dimensions. They're related, but they're a little bit different. So an identity is distinct. You can be a parent, a soccer fan, an artist, a widow, a volunteer, and you can hold multiple identities, but these aren't necessarily related to the dimensions or classes that we think about, like race or gender. So yeah, my company's doing a lot of great work in this area, in addition to hiring and retaining and fostering the growth among a widely diverse talent pool.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the different types of people that you've shared with us, of like it seems like it's a very diverse community compared to your former employer. And I just love that you're getting to work with all different types of people.
Oh, for sure. And all the things that I just, that big spiel that I just gave, thanks for listening through it, was all things that I learned at work. Like I said, my background is aerospace and mechanical engineering, and DE&I was kind of a passion project that I've developed in the corporate space over the last 8 years. And so the fact that some of these academic points are things that my company provides in a training aspect, in a formalized training aspect, is just wonderful. So
well, I think what you had to say was fascinating,
yeah.
because there's so many, the way that you said it's things that, as a privileged white cis female, like I feel like those are, it's my brain doesn't necessarily operate in that way. And so that's why we have these conversations, and that's why we keep learning, because it is a journey.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, with that, we are going to jump into the next clip.
What are some of the ways that you guys interpret emotional intelligence?
Just someone who like being mindful. And like I feel like being mindful is like a loaded subject. Like knowing and thinking like outside of just who you are, but like
Yeah.
being empathetic and having a deeper understanding of like maybe why someone else is doing something or how they got there and not just seeing things like face value. I think that's a big part of like emotional intelligence, being able to like see people
Mhm.
and not just like judge them.
Yeah.
And knowing that like every action has a reaction. I know I shared with you guys earlier how my introduction to emotional intelligence was knowing that if someone cuts me off when I'm driving, if somebody cuts me off, if I like retaliate immediately, you know, that could lead to like that could be dangerous, one.
Yeah.
Two, it just leads to further problems down the road. Where someone who has emotional intelligence understands that something bigger can happen, is like take a deep breath, calm down, and just drive on. You know what I mean? Everything doesn't warrant a reaction all the time. And just, you know, being able to think ahead a little.
I can definitely see emotional intelligence like as used as like in a leadership position, especially with like communication. And you know, with emotional intelligence, that's like listening to others, you know, reflecting before you respond to them, acknowledging them, having empathy, and trying to like recognize any misunderstandings. And I feel like from my own personal experiences, like you want to work for people that have your best interests at heart, and people that respect you and value you. And I've worked for people in the past that just did not do that like at all. And I've worked with people that were just really aggressive with their words, and you know, instead of communicating their problems and trying to work to resolve the problems of like miscommunication, they would just be completely belligerent. And it was kind of like a hard situation because I had never had to really assert myself before. But it's like hard when someone is like, you know, in this position above you and they're just like kind of patronizing you. It's like, how do you respond to that?
It's difficult to hear, you know, Alexis talk about her negative experience, because I can absolutely relate to that. And, you know, I feel like, you know, oftentimes we learn how to be better leaders by what not to do. And with the concept specifically of emotional intelligence, I really was not aware of it as a concept until teaching about it this past semester. And, you know, I know I personally can't really pinpoint a time where I'm like, okay, I am now self-aware. I am now able to regulate my emotions. I am now very empathetic. But I feel like it was just like this journey over time and lived experiences. So Becky, what about you? Like, do you feel like has it also been a journey for you, or were you like, oh nope, I took this class or I had this experience and okay, here we are, emotional intelligence and self-awareness?
Good question. So I agree. It is hard to hear the struggles that Alexis has gone through, and the other students, even Nasira, and I commend them for being transparent and vulnerable and sharing their stories, because that's how we all grow. And to your point, it's a journey, and it's a continual journey, and none of us are ever done. And it's something that's going to evolve with current events and with our increased understanding, and as the society becomes more self-aware. Like I don't feel like pronouns was necessarily a topic of conversation 5, 10, 15 years ago, and you know, here we are introducing ourselves with them, which is great, right? So it's always going to evolve. And another point that you made, which I totally agree with, was that sometimes bad experiences are good teachers. So sometimes learning what not to do from ineffective leaders and organizations can be just as valuable. As far as my personal journey, so I heard about EQ, emotional intelligence. I don't know that it was like a light bulb that went off I think similar to you and most other folks, it's an ongoing learning experience. I have been in cognitive behavioral therapy for 10 years now. And so working with a therapist for a long time on, you know, modulating myself and setting realistic expectations and understanding what is and not in my control. So working in the gray area of life, which is not something I was necessarily raised with. I was raised with pretty strict, academically minded parents. You know, there was a right and a wrong. Is fairly binary in terms of success criteria. So navigating the gray space and giving each other grace is something that's definitely been part of this evolution. In a corporate setting, absolutely, the students were correct. You know, this is something that's inherent to leadership, and we see this often in like Myers-Briggs assessments or other personality types in relationships as love languages, right? You need to understand and empathize where the other person is coming from, facilitate positive dialogue, and hopefully, I mean, best case scenario is you're not just sympathizing, you're empathizing because there are voices in the room that represent diverse perspectives, right? We at our company say nothing about us without us. Like, we're not going to make technology for folks with lived experiences that we don't have. So we're going to hire people on that have those lived experiences and can best inform, you know, what needs to be done.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, let's jump into our next clip.
Yeah, and I feel like as a leader, it's just important to be able to take time to like reflect on yourself, and the, you know, the decisions that you make and respond appropriately. And like, you know, if you're working with someone, know that they could be potentially uncomfortable with like telling you about yourself. So maybe even like asking questions to get some insight as to like, you know, are you respecting them? Are you like respecting boundaries, you know?
Yeah.
But it's just, yeah, stepping outside of yourself.
I almost wonder as well, you know, talking about how your managers were being belligerent.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they felt like they had to be that way, just because I feel like in a lot of media, managers are kind of seen as like stern figures who like, to some degree are like always right, and like you have to do it their way or the highway kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if people think they have to fill that role as opposed to realizing there are multiple ways to lead people. And in fact, that's probably one of the worst things you can do, is to not give people like creative liberty and like leeway and feel comfortable where they're at in their job. Because like, how comfortable did you feel there, you know?
Yeah, not comfortable at all. Like, I didn't feel like I could ask him questions, because if you ask him a question, it's like he'll just get mad that you asked. And it's like, that's the whole point of you being a leader, is, you know, guiding me. And yeah, it was just a really terrible experience. And so, you know, in other classes we've talked about like the role of gender and like leadership and managing. And it kind of talked about like how men are able to use aggressive language and to be stern or just be aggressive in general, where women are not like afforded that right a lot of the time, and people interpret them as being just like rude, but men are allowed to do it. And I kind of like, after the fact, I was just like, you know, he really didn't respect me as another person. And it's like he did this with everybody. Like, he was just, it's like it was okay for him because nobody had like checked him on it.
Oh, what Alexis has to say is just so infuriating and frustrating, because I think that has been you know, a problem for a long time of, you know, men are able to, you know, particularly in leadership roles, are able to act aggressive, and that's quote unquote okay, which it's clearly not okay. And I think that that's why a lot of us are pushing back, speaking out, kind of not afraid of the consequences, but at the same time moving away from that toxic masculinity culture and finding spaces where we can thrive and where we feel, you know, appreciated and celebrated, and, you know, not talked down to, not yelled at. So, you know, I'm kind of curious, Becky, with regards to your previous place of employment, I know there was a lot of, kind of toxic masculinity, and do you think that there will ever really be a shift in change with companies like them, or do you think that that's just how it's always going to be?
Great question. Okay, so I think change is possible. It needs to be a step function change. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations do, corporate window dressing, greenwashing, kind washing, rainbow
Yes,
washing, right?
yes. Very performative.
They virtue signal without putting the resources that is, money, hiring, training, once they get people in the door, actually fostering a culture of inclusion and growth that will affect long-term change. So I definitely resonate with your students. I'm really sorry that they had to go through those experiences. The second speaker, I think it might have been Eve, talked about, had to be that way.
Yeah, that was Eve that said their point was do they think that this is the way that it's always been done, and like maybe this is how I was taught, and so this is the style that I'm going to lead with because I don't know any better.
Exactly. Right. Toxic workplace cultures I think are learned. It's the I had to suffer, so you do too mentality, or I just have to do what it takes to survive.
It's
And
like a form of hazing. It makes me think of kind of like the college forms of hazing of I endured this, so I in turn am going to haze you, and the cycle continues.
right. And in a way, I'm like pity, the people that have this mindset because they're stuck in this cycle, and it's not even necessarily their fault. It might be that they weren't given the resources and they don't know better. They don't know how to lead. They're not equipped for success. I mean, at my previous company, first line manager was like the worst job ever, right? You had to be the career developer, the technical backstop. You had to work, on finance and schedule. You had to lead upwards but also, take all the crap that came from leadership and shield your subordinates from that. And it was just like way too many hats for one person to wear. And so then as humans, when people are not set up for success, shit kind of flows downhill. So
Yep.
unfortunately, they weren't equipped to deal with that. So in a way, it's almost like I pity, if the system is not set up for success, of course there's going to be failure. So it needs to be a step function change. And while individuals can be bright spots in these little oases in these organizations, it takes a step function, shift in order for these things to happen. I did want to say something about the asking questions, which is what one of the speakers said at the very beginning. I love that. I think we should all ask more questions. And unfortunately, it sounds like those speakers were put in a situation where asking questions was frowned upon because instead of teaching, they were being shamed for not knowing something, which is a terrible thing to put a young person through.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leadership style, always no question was a dumb question. Type of mentality is something that I try to foster. The only caveat is if you're asking a personal question, I always make sure to offer up that same information of myself just to be equitable, right? So if I'm going to ask your pronouns, I would say, hey, MG, I use she, her pronouns. Like, what pronouns do you use? Or, hey, MG, my background is I'm Chinese. What's your ethnic heritage? Because otherwise, if you come off as probing or othering, right? You don't want you don't want it to be a bridge and not like I'm going to point out this specific identity of you to be nosy.
Absolutely. And it's, I think that it's a fine line. We were talking about this a little bit before the recording that, we absolutely want to be respectful of other people. And I think it's like kind of learning how to approach, certain situations. What is the best way to, ask someone's pronouns. And, so that's why, a lot of us are now putting it in our email signatures. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is just normalize it and continue to learn, the best way to either ask or communicate or learn. So Becky, what is your employer's approach to asking and or sharing pronouns?
So it's definitely very normalized at my place of work, which I'm grateful for. Most people put it in their email signatures, on their Slack handles. And if they don't, we have a positive corporate culture where people give each other grace. I actually was politely corrected offline. I was holding a meeting. There was a person with a traditionally female name. I'll say from an Anglican standpoint, it's generally a female name. I refer to this person as she. We finished up the meeting. Somebody else, not the individual I referred to, but somebody else, slacked me later and they're like, hey, by the way, this person uses they, them pronouns. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me. I will definitely make sure to do this moving forward, say a little, hey, by the way, sorry for misgendering you. I'll tell that person directly, privately, but it was handled with grace. I appreciate the learning. And so I think it's
that's
a very
an excellent
positive
way to
experience.
approach it. Yeah, I did the same thing. So in another community that I'm part of, the leader of the organization had misgendered someone else in the organization, and it was just I knew that this person knew, but it was just a slip, like a mind slip. And so I sent her a private message and just said, hey, by the way, they use they them pronouns. And she's like, I knew it, I'm so sorry, I'm going to send them a quick email. And it was the same situation where it was all approached with like grace, learning, because we are, again, it's a journey, we are learning. So, but it's great that these initiatives are being made and these conversations are being had. All right, gonna jump into the next clip.
I feel like that leads into like the conversation we had in class about leadership versus management.
Mhm.
Where like he clearly was not a good leader.
Yeah.
He clearly needed like some support. It's like that's
Yeah.
wrong.
Feel like from what you're talking about, he just had a lot of like emotional instability potentially, just from what I'm hearing. Like it sounds like he was easy to lose his temper potentially.
Yeah. It's like anger issues and just like berating people for no reason. And it's like, I feel like that's another thing of like emotional intelligence, like not being able to step outside yourself, because he acted entitled to everything. Like, which is like, you have to respect other people to like be able to like ask for things back. And it's like, he just had no like, it's like he functioned like everything had to go his way. And if something didn't go his way, then everybody's at fault.
I mean, it says a lot about who he is as a person, but like,
the goal should just be to like understand each other and help each other, not to like get reactions out of people.
Yeah, that feels very counterintuitive. It's like, why are you trying to create a hostile work environment just because you find it entertaining, question mark? Like, I don't understand why you would do that. You should try and have your team be like a collaborative, positive effort and not have anybody feel like it's not like unsafe, but like unwelcome,
Yeah. You should aim to encourage, not discourage.
This concept of entitlement. I know I've shared on our friendship Slack channel that I've been watching the Woodstock 99 documentary. You want to talk about entitlement? Like it's absolutely insane how just so many, these angry white males in their early 20s just it was very infuriating to watch and just very, very toxic. And so, when I'm thinking about toxic workplace culture, it's like, I wonder how many of these people grew into, bosses, because, this was 20 years ago. So is that how math works?
So many, MG.
Yeah. And
so many. There's a lot of failure. So many.
I hate it when people fail. No, when they fail
upwards.
Fail upwards. It's infuriating. And just this, so when she dropped the word entitlement, I'm like, oh, it just made me so angry. I'm like, what do they have to be angry about? But so taking it back, 20 years, younger, so this younger generation, these Gen Zers, what are your observations? I'm getting to hear from these students in my class, but I feel like I don't really have a whole lot of interaction with folks of that generation. So what has been your experience, whether in the workplace or from a personal standpoint?
Honestly, same. I haven't had a ton of interaction. For listeners, I was born in 1992, so I'm 30 this year. So I would consider myself a millennial. I do work with some great Gen Zers. I have a sister that's 3 years younger than me, and I have some cousins that are in high school and college. So most of what I see is through that lens. But from what I've seen, I am so inspired. It just seems like, and this is all anecdotal, but it just seems like Gen Z is way more plugged in than I was at that age. They have courage to speak their truth and to go after what they want without shame, knowing their worth. I think in this environment, and maybe because COVID, there's a lot more work-life balance emphasis on job postings now, and having flexible and remote work options and positive corporate culture. And I think that's awesome. And thanks for doing that legwork, Gen Z, because what's good for one group is generally good for all. So, I am so grateful for them for kind of spearheading that and taking on that mantle.
And it's, I probably mentioned this in a lot of episodes of like where I was 20 years ago, when I was their age, that I had the privilege of not caring about, anything that I didn't want to care about, that the world is a completely different place now. And just what we're all collectively going through as a society, and them having to deal with this at, 18 to 23 versus what I dealt with in that time frame in my life, that it's impressive how they show up in the world.
100% agree. It's very resilient. I mean, I was talking to my partner. We've been married for almost 4 years now, and I'm like, listen, we're not in school. We're already married. We don't have kids. Like, we got so lucky, relatively speaking, in terms of COVID and the whole experience. And I mean, in addition to everything else is going on in the world, like, it was an ideal time for COVID to happen in our lives. So these Gen Zers are just so resilient and are just gonna rocket off into the future. And I'm really excited to see it.
Totally right there with you. All right, let's check out our next clip.
So we talked about stories of like bad leadership. My job recently got a new director, and it's like very refreshing. Like, he's very open. You can tell that like he came in and immediately, like, you could tell like he has been for like our team. Our team is made up of like I work in a school. It's made up of a lot of different teachers and staff. We did this thing where everyone wrote down 3 facts about their culture, and then we hung them up like all around the school. Then everyone tried to guess. It was like a team building, getting everyone to know about each other. I thought it was really nice. We got a chance to get a deeper like understanding of everyone, and I feel like it created a nice work environment. And it was cool. I've never had that happen with a leader before, but it was really nice.
It's like a pretty good icebreaker, and I feel like probably people even who you had been working with, you probably learned new things from them just by doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I've been working there for 3 years. I'm like, wow, really? After 3 years of knowing someone.
Yeah, it probably helps to have a really open leader. Like, I feel like it takes away the pressure a lot of the times of a situation, and and like not having that like judgmental space. I feel like it just allows you to be more expressive in like your ideas and ways that you can impact the organization.
Yeah, I feel like a good leader brings forth like better workers. So like the fact that we did that and we learned we are better at our jobs now, which is I feel like the goal of a company and any organization. Like, you want your workers to be better, so they give out better results.
Yeah, I think acknowledgement is like a really important thing. Like, just having people feel like they're a part of what you started. Like, being able to meet people where they are and understand things that are going on in their life, you know, you were in a vulnerable condition, and it's like, I just don't think that's like what builds trust when people can't understand things that are going on in somebody else's life, like especially in like the workplace. Because it's like there's this whole, you know, capitalist desire to just keep moving and moving, and I feel like people don't recognize that people have things going on in their lives, things that could be potentially like traumatic and could affect their life for like a long time. And I just don't think that's a way to like build trust and, you know, establish like this culture of just understanding and just genuine like care for others, like just you gotta be a good person.
Right. Like, sometimes you got to put the needs of the business aside to make sure like that your team is good, you know.
Yeah.
So Becky, I'm curious, you know, do you feel that your needs are, your emotional needs are being met within your new team? And I'm also curious, how do you connect with your coworkers? I know you're only in the office a couple days a week, but how does everyone kind of check in with each other, if you do at all?
So yes, I definitely think my needs are being met with my new team. It's an amazing community. I'm very, very lucky to be where I am. I'm surrounded by a lot of women, a lot of people of
Which is
color.
the
Folks.
opposite from your
Yeah,
previous experience.
my previous experience was very homogenous. Uh, you know, I can even just see in my leadership chain, folks who are openly part of the LGBT community, folks who are transparent about their physical and mental ability differences. You know, so seeing that displayed in leadership, which is the way that the company shows that it values people, right? It uplifts these people, it puts them in a position to succeed, is just really great. It's really refreshing, you know, to walk into a space and immediately recognize a sister soul there. Like you almost release a breath that you didn't realize you were holding. Um, in terms of cultivating a positive culture, just connecting to people on a personal level, right? I mean, and we did this at my old company too. I will say, the boss I had at my old company created this little like oasis. She had cultivated this really great, you know, little haven within a more homogenous environment where she uh, cared about us as people and reached out to us outside of work in a good way, you know, always checking on us, especially during the height of the pandemic. And we shared everything from books and podcasts and TV shows and had safe outdoor meetups, things like that. And that has continued in my new team, is just trying to find those bonds and those tendons to reach across any gaps that appear.
So there is time carved out for socializing and really getting to know one another.
Yeah, 100%. And being in a more creative space now, I think it's more embedded in the culture, you know, because it's supposed to be innovative. I do think the old company I was at, because it was much more structured and government related, there was not a lot of room for error. There was not a lot of room for trying new things. We had to hit very, very exact scientific, you know,
It's the way it's
measurements.
always been done, Becky. Way it's always been done.
So this company I'm in now, it being an innovative, you know, customer forward company, is being great, and it does encourage that type of culture of opening each other's minds to what is possible.
I had a similar transition as well. In you know, my first out of college job, I was working in logistics, and so kind of the same thing of, you know, more or less like glorified data entry. There is one way to do things. It was not fun. Loved my coworkers, loved being able to work, you know, in Old City. That was absolutely wonderful. Still friends with, you know, some of the folks that I used to work with there. But it was not a job that served me. And so to leave there to go to grad school at Temple, to be able to not just get my master's in tourism and hospitality management and really thrive in the classes, but the externship I had while I was there working with student organizations, where thrived on creativity and being able to bring my personality into my job. And I absolutely loved it. So, of course I'm back in higher ed. It just makes sense. Life comes full circle. So I'm really glad you have that creative outlet, because, even though you have an engineering background, we met you through our mutual friend, because y'all were on like the social committee together or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're a very fun, outgoing woman. And so I'm excited that it seems like you found your people.
Oh, for sure. I do want to take it back to the clip from your students real quick. And, the first speaker having a much better experience now that they have a new supervisor. And I think that's awesome. Yeah. Good for them. I'm happy. The takeaway I got in listening to that a couple of times, because I listened to it before this recording also, was how one person can make such a big difference. And that to me is hopeful, right? It empowers you to say, look at this impact I can have on other people. It also is a large responsibility, because as we know, intent versus impact can be different. And so especially in a position of leadership, those of us that have more power or in the dominant culture do have that responsibility and accountability to make sure our impact on others is positive, to uplift the marginalized. And that's how step function change. I mentioned this before about how cultures need to change, but those in power, that's how step function changes are formed, is the collective of each individual's impact joining together. So I don't know, it's a little bit counterintuitive and conflicting. I'm kind of rambling, but great that that your student is having a more positive experience, and hopefully that inspires people to focus on their individual impact on others.
Beautiful. Well, Becky, I'm gonna hit you with a surprise question, since you weren't able to join us in the classroom environment. One of the questions I asked all my guest speakers is just, what advice do you have for the students? And so if there's any advice that you want to give to this younger generation, and feel free to take a second to think about it, but I'd love to hear any advice you have.
Oof. Well, it's weird. I mean, a bit of the like female imposter syndrome. I sometimes feel like I'm not equipped to give advice. So I'll give this in two parts, which goes along with my imposter syndrome, and you'll understand in a second. The first is give each other grace and keep evolving, which I think your students are probably already doing, beautifully.
We all are.
Right. We're all on a journey together.
Tell everyone.
Exactly. It's a privilege to learn that you're wrong. I mean, and coming from an engineering background, right? That's how the scientific method works. You discover new information that you didn't know before. You figured out what you thought you knew was wrong, and then you move forward, and we call that progress. And so often now, especially with social media, there's like canceling and there's holding people accountable, but there's also like canceling, which is like, no, give that person space to grow, to learn from their mistakes, to demonstrate that they're going to do better, right? So that would be my advice. But the second piece of that is take every piece of advice with a grain of salt, because I'm just one person, right? And I was a very sheltered child. And so then when I went into the work world, I kind of just assumed that adults magically knew what they were doing. Like you turn a certain age and one day you know how to do your taxes and like a switch flips. That's not the case. We're all like faking it. So for you young people out there, you probably know a lot more than you think you do. So in addition to giving each other grace, give yourselves credit. And while it's always great to take wisdom from elders, take it with a grain of salt. What works for you? You don't have to take another person's word as gospel. You got to make it work for yourself.
Love it. I think that's excellent advice. Well, Becky, this was a wonderful conversation. So many amazing points. DEI is definitely not my wheelhouse. And so getting to learn from a budding expert such as yourself was a real treat. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to Alexis, Eve, and Nasira for their sage wisdom as well. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. Check out Beyond the Venue podcast on Instagram. And we've got seasons 1 through 3 streaming on all of your favorite podcast streaming platforms. Enjoy the rest of your day.
This is a Bivesta production.